13 Questions by Man Transcending. Manhood in the Digital Age. Welcome back to 13 Questions. My name is Adam. Today we are going to be interviewing Kyle Philson of the Expanded Perspectives podcast. I really enjoyed this interview, and having a chance to go back and listen to it again, Kyle's got me thinking a lot deeper about the many facets of courage. I'm not going to spoil the interview for you, but his choosing to take a child into his life unexpectedly, it's a completely different type of courage than running into a burning building. To commit 18 years to mold the mind of a person, not knowing how or even if you're going to succeed for decades, it's really got me thinking. And that's why I love these questions so much. They offer windows into yourself. So I hope that you guys enjoy the podcast as much as I have. So, who is Kyle? Kyle Philson was born on August 9th in Fort Worth, Texas. His mother and father were lifelong residents of New Jersey and moved south only a few years before his birth in order to seek out a better living. Growing up in rural Texas in a small town outside of Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, Kyle spent a lot of time in the woods hunting, fishing, and camping. His early interest in the paranormal was first sparked by his father and uncles. Watching shows like Unsolved Mysteries and In Search Of, along with reading numerous books by John Keel and Ivan T. Sanderson, Kyle became fascinated by UFOs, Bigfoot, time slips, and parallel universes. Keeping an open mind and exploring these topics, he strives to present these stories and experiences shared only by a few in a fun and lighthearted way. Kyle currently lives in Texas with his wife and 3 sons, and by day masquerades as a realtor appraiser. You can learn more about Kyle at expandedperspectives.com. And if you would like to become a member of 13 Questions, which is going to give you access to the bonus questions, you can go to 13questionspodcast.com and sign up. You're also going to get over $200 in communication courses by TJ Walker, the ability to join the community forum, sign up for journaling exercises that are emailed out to you, the opportunity to record your own 13 Questions podcast with a friend, a family member, anybody that you guys think would make a good interview. If the audio quality is up to snuff, then we're going to go ahead and put it into the regular feed. What we're finding out is that everybody has a story to tell. You just got to ask the right questions. So thank you guys so much for being part of 13 Questions, and I hope that you enjoy the show. You ready, Kyle?
Yep, I'm ready.
What was the best advice ever given to you?
Let me think about that. I would say probably some of the best advice ever given to me was how to give a proper handshake, how to look someone in the eye when you're greeted by somebody, holding the door for an approaching person, probably, basically respect others, and most of all, respect yourself. I see so many people today. You'll be approaching a store and there'll be literally steps in front of you and they'll let the door slam in your face. And I just don't understand. It only takes, I know people are consumed with their phones and their busy lives, but I think just little courtesies to one another goes a long way, especially a good firm handshake and looking someone in the eye when you meet them. So that's probably the best advice I've ever been given.
Where did you learn that? Was it military or family that instilled that?
Yeah, definitely. I was not in the military. It was definitely family. Both my father and my grandfather, they were big sticklers for that. I mean, they had their rules. I remember being reprimanded, as a child, lots of times. And when you're a kid, you're just like, what's the big deal? Like, what do they care? Like, my grandfather didn't like it if I came in his house and I didn't remove my hat, or
Right.
I was not allowed to sit at the dinner table with a hat on, just little things like that. And now, fast forward, as an adult and as a father of myself, I have 3 boys. I totally see where they're coming from because it makes a big difference, especially when first impressions are everything. If you meet somebody and they're respectful and they hold their head up high and they seem confident, it changes your whole perspective of that person.
Exactly. It's not how it affects you from having to do it. It's how it affects other people.
Exactly. And if you're brought up that way and it's drilled into you, it becomes habit. Like I do it now, holding doors for people and things like that. It's not even conscious to me. It's just, that's what you're supposed to do. That's how I notice it when other people don't do it. I'm like, what's wrong with that person?
Yeah. What was the most important lesson you learned from your parents?
Uh, I think one of the most important things or lessons I learned from my parents uh, is if you wanted something to go for it. Like they never gave me any limits as a kid. They never told me that something was off limits. Like if you wanted to pursue, I don't know, being a special effects artist or something like that, they would encourage me. I remember as a kid, we would beg my parents to let us use the video camera. And back then, they're not like now. They were these big camcorders. They would go on your shoulder, and they would take like a full size VHS cassette that would go in the side. And me and my brother and some of my friends or cousins or kids just around, we would make our own home movies. And we would mirror them after things we saw on television. Like I think popular at the time was like Miami Vice. And so we would film little drug deals. Somebody would have like a backgammon case, and then we would fill it with bags of powdered sugar, and somebody would be dressed in an overcoat and have a toy gun, and we would even dub sound effects off the television. We didn't have any way of doing any editing at that time, or knew how to even do it. But I remember making those home videos, and my parents would be thrilled. They'd be like, "Yeah, let's watch it," and we would watch it, and there was always this thing put into us, me and my brother, that if you want something, you can do it. Now, it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to probably put in a lot of hard work, but you can accomplish almost anything. So I enjoyed that as a kid because I had the freedom. I probably had a little bit too much freedom, but because we got in trouble sometimes from time to time. But I think it led me to the path I'm on now without even consciously knowing it at the time.
That's awesome.
Yeah. In fact, we've been trying to find some of those old home movies that we made. We made a couple war movies, things like that. They're silly, but if I could find them somehow and convert them digitally, I would love to upload them on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, people forget the nuance that was imparted when you didn't have just something you could hold in your hand that you had to lug around and carry around, and you had it wasn't portable. You had a extension cord running out to you where you were going.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
It was a big difference. But I like that kind of thing. I didn't know it at the time, but we were all, me and the host of the other host of the show, Cam, who's one of my best friends. We were already kind of creating things back then, even as teenagers.
Awesome. Practicing for the real world without even knowing it.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, thanks to technology, we're able to move forward.
What book has been most influential on your life and why?
Okay. This is a tough one because I've done a lot of reading. I like to read. I'm kind of a bookworm. I read a lot of books. So narrowing it down was kind of hard. But I think if I have to think of one, I would probably say Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock. And this book came out like in 1995, and I remember what was so impactful by it. It was the first time that I'd ever even heard of someone suggesting that there was some ancient, highly advanced, perhaps enigmatic civilization that existed long before the one that we knew about, and that it was somehow destroyed at the end of the last ice age. And a few survivors lived, and they spread their knowledge of astronomy and mathematics and architecture and agriculture to other indigenous people. And I remember when I read that, it like blew my mind because I was like, I've never heard of this. I took a lot of history courses all through high school and AP courses and things like that, and no one ever brought this up. That perhaps
so it was a big window.
It was huge. I never had heard of that. I grew up in a small town in Texas. These kind of ideas, I doubt that the teachers even knew, but it was definitely not taught to me in school. And so when I first read this, I was like, what? There was a civilization before the one we knew about that was wiped out. You start reading stories about Atlantis and things like that, and the flood myths that are propagated by all different cultures from all over the world. And you start hearing about these stories of these white bearded men showing up on the shores in South America, the Viracocha, and they were passing on this knowledge to other tribes and indigenous people. And I was just like, it completely changed my outlook. It was the first time, because I was raised where I thought that everybody knew the history of mankind. We knew what happened. This, all the way back from the between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerians and all that, and people populated and moved out, and mathematics was learned over time. I had never even crossed my mind to think that maybe there was an earlier civilization that was wiped out by some catastrophe, and then what was learned or what was even lost. I mean, you know about the fire, the burning of the library in Alexandria. I mean, what could have been in those libraries that's lost to time? I remember reading in there about the Great Pyramids. That Graham had been there, and that it was only a theory that they were the tomb for Khufu or something. It wasn't a fact. And to me, I always thought everything was understood, and it turns out that even today, lots of people don't know exactly the way it went, and it probably went way different than we think, especially with the discovery of Göbekli Tepe and other places now that were not hardly known about at that time, or the writing of that book in 1995. There's just so much out there that I didn't know. And so that book to me was really eye-opening. And because of what I learned from the reading of that book and the revealing of that information, I think it changed my outlook on other things in my life, other aspects.
Yeah, I don't see how it couldn't, because once you realize that there's an aspect of history you haven't been taught, aside from that aspect, you go, well, why is there that vacuum? Which is just a whole plethora of other, world eye-opening experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It changed my outlook on other things, and which led me to start looking into other things. Up until that time, I had no idea that there were other books of the Bible that were conveniently left out of the King James Version. I had no idea. I was like, what? I thought this was the whole thing. No, there was a council in Nicaea, and they voted on what books would be allowed in. And then, the more you start reading into it, you start realizing that, like the creators of who organized this version of the Bible, they curtailed it for their objective. And so, then you start pulling back the veil on this, and you start pulling back the veil on other things, and you start realizing that, wow, there's a whole lot. You shouldn't just always take somebody's word for something. You should really look into it.
Nice. What daily habits or rituals do you have?
Yeah. I don't know that I have any daily rituals or habits. Mine would be, if I had to say anything, it would be pretty mundane. It would be like waking up, checking email for the show, checking email for my business, because I have my own business as a real estate appraiser. And, just getting back with listeners or clients and things like that. That would probably be my only daily ritual, other than, making myself a sandwich or something. I don't really have any habits. I'm not into CrossFit or jogging or running or riding or cycling or anything like that. I don't really. When I started having kids, I had to give up on the sports, and so I used to play ice hockey for a long time, and I had to give that up about 7 or so years ago. So since then, I don't think I really have nothing interesting. I don't practice yoga or anything like that.
If I were to ask your best friend, what is the one thing they would say you need to work on the most, and why?
Okay. I would say my best friends, if they were to talk to me, they would probably say, try to be a little bit more healthy. They'd probably say drink a little less. I know one of my good buddies would tell me to spend more time with my children. And the reason I say that, not that I don't, but he had children when we were far younger. And this would be my best friend Cam, the co-host of the show. All his kids are grown. So his son's like 25, his daughter's like 19. And so she's about ready to leave the house. And so he constantly reminds me, because I have identical twin 11-year-old boys, and then I have a 7-year-old son as well. And he constantly reminds me to spend time with him, because it goes by so fast. And much like lots of things people tell you when you're younger, you're like, yeah. But he's so right. I can't believe my oldest will be driving a car in 5 years. They'll be ready to leave the house in like 8. I can't believe my youngest is already 7. It really does go by fast, and you never know what's going to happen. So I would say spend more time with my family, my children, my wife, my kids. Probably be a little bit more healthy. I need to probably exercise more than I do. My sons play baseball, so I get to get out there and help a lot with that. So that kind of keeps me in good shape. I go on a lot of hikes and stuff, hunting and things. And probably drink less. I like to have a couple beers at night, or on the weekends.
What are you most curious about?
I would say space.
Mm.
I've always been fascinated with space. I think I remember being a young kid and on the PBS channel, remember watching the original Cosmos with Carl Sagan. And I had an aunt that bought me a telescope. This was all around the same time. I think I was probably about 9 or 10. And I became fascinated with space. So I had wallpaper in my room, and the wallpaper in my bedroom was of the lunar surface. So it looked like the moon, and then you could see the Earth out there. And so my whole room, the theme of it was space. And I remember learning a lot about the planets and the stars. And there was a science museum near where I grew up in Fort Worth, and they had a couple astronomy classes you could take. And I remember taking those as a young kid. And you would go there during the day, and you would learn about things, and then you would have a group at night that would meet, and we would stargaze and look at the stars. And they had these $high telescopes, and they would teach the kids how to use them and things like that. I remember really being interested in that. And probably if you would ask me at that time, I probably wanted to be an astronomer. Well, I never did that, but even today, I'm fascinated by space. If there's like a good documentary or something that comes on television and it happens to do with space or planets or stuff like that, I'm usually hooked. I can't change the channel. So I'm really fascinated with space. I like all the stuff that's going on with Mars. I keep up with SpaceX and things like that.
Fun. I like that answer. What was the most embarrassing experience of your life?
The most embarrassing experience in my life. I don't know. That's a tough one. Maybe we can come back to that one.
Sure.
Give me some time to think about that.
What is your greatest fear, and how did you overcome it?
Okay. My biggest fear, and even as a young person, but even now I would say, was becoming a loser. I didn't want to be a loser. I remember in high school and after high school, not really knowing what I wanted to do. You're pressed by a lot of people, even starting in like your sophomore or junior year. Like you need to start coming up with like what college you want to go to. You need to start coming up with what do you want to major in? You got to have all these ideas, and those are all great, but I didn't know. I didn't know what to do. And I had a couple other friends that didn't know what to do. And that was thing that was always talked about. Well, you better decide or else you're going to be a loser. You don't want to be a loser. And after growing up, I seen some friends that I went to school with that you would classify now, I guess, as losers. And they're still doing pretty much the same thing they were doing 20 years ago. And I'm so glad that I didn't become that. But that was a real motivator for me. Is like I had to get involved in something. Because I didn't want to turn into a loser. So I went to college for a couple years. I did not finish college, and I got into real estate. My mother was a real estate agent, and so I originally tried to do that. I was only about 19 or 20.
Oh, wow.
When I started, and I quickly learned that no one's going to buy a house from like a 20-year-old kid or a 19-year-old kid. They're just not going to do it. So I really couldn't get any work. So then I transitioned into real estate appraising, which for those that don't know what that is, whenever you want to buy a home and you go to your bank and you need to get a mortgage, well, the bank will send an appraiser out to appraise the value of the home that you're looking to purchase to make sure that it's worth a certain amount of money. So if you were to default on your loan or whatever, and they had to foreclose on you, they would be able to sell the home and get their money back, right? Their investment. So anytime somebody's buying a home, anytime someone's building a new home, or just refinancing their home that they already own, they send out an appraiser. So I work for a bunch of different banks. And I remember early on choosing that, liking it, and I remember laying in bed at night thinking, thank God I found something, because I get to work alone. I'm by myself often, almost all day. Now, especially, I'm by myself all the time because I work for myself. And I remember thinking, thank God I'm not going to be a loser. I have something I can do, something I enjoy. And that was a big relief to me. And in fact, because I'm on my own all the time, that's how I discovered podcast. Because when you're working by yourself all
Mm-hmm.
the time, you listen to the radio a lot, and most stations, they play the same 20 songs over and over. You can only go through that for so long before you go crazy. And then of course we turn on like classic rock, which I really like, but I've been listening to those songs for 20 years. Tired of that. Um, you can listen to sports talk. I'm not really into that. It's usually people just complaining about how the local team's doing all the time. And so that's when I stumbled upon podcasts. And I don't know how I got off on this tangent, but working and trying not to be a loser led me to many things.
Nice. Who were and or are your role models and why?
I'd say my biggest role model was probably my grandfather, my mother's father. Um, he was a World War II vet. He was a very strict man, but kind. Um, he was in D-Day. Um, I think he went on to fight the Battle of the Bulge. And I don't know, he didn't really talk about it that much. And of course, I was a kid, so I didn't really know what to ask. But I remember he inspired me. I knew that whatever it was that he did or had went through, it was conveyed to me that it was something important. And I watched the way he would carry himself, and he was always a big role model. Much like I talked about earlier, shaking someone's hand properly, looking them in the eye, taking your hat off when you walk in a building or at a dinner table, or holding a door for someone, things like that, manners. And these are all things that were taught to me by him. So I would always look up to him. I always seeked his approval, I think. So he was probably my biggest role model.
What institution of society or structural aspect of modern life would you change given the chance?
I would say probably school, modern day public school in particular, and even universities. I think at one time they served their purpose. You had to go to a university physically and get accepted and attend. But nowadays, with online courses and things like that, I know kids in school no longer take textbooks to school. I was trying to explain to my young boys the other day about how we would be issued these books, and you would have the first day or so of school, you always spent putting book covers on your books, right? And you had to put these book covers on, and you could decorate the outside with whatever you wanted and things like that. And these are all things that are foreign to them because they do everything basically through like a Chromebook. They email their homework assignments into their teacher, things like that. I think school is kind of an antiquated idea. I think you could probably say, we'll just pick a university, Auburn University. You could attend Auburn University. You don't necessarily have to go there, like physically. Like, why couldn't you just attend it online? And I think a lot of these courses, at least, or a lot of these universities, I'm sorry, offer online courses. And I know in the beginning, a couple of years ago, University of Phoenix or something like that, they were kind of laughed about, by people that went to real universities. They were like, oh yeah. But I think it's becoming more mainstream. I don't necessarily think that you have to go to these universities or schools to be taught things. And then there's things like in public school that aren't taught anymore, that were taught when I was a kid. Like there's no metal shop anymore,
right,
where my kids go to school. There's no wood shop. There's no home economic courses where they teach you how to bake cookies or teach you how to load a dishwasher, teach you how to make a meatloaf or things like basic, how to balance a checkbook, how to write a check, or mail a letter. These are just basic things. There's kids literally that don't know how to do that because they've grown up with only debit cards. They've never had to physically write a check. I remember being like metal shop and really enjoying that, learning how to use a cutting torch, learning how to use an arc welder, learning how to use a saw and power drills and things like that. These are things that, if you grew up in a fatherless home with no one to teach you, you're never going to learn these things. And these things are important for not just men, but for women too. There's a lot of that stuff that's left out of schools. And I think that's harmful. With what's going on in the universities nowadays, I mean, it's kind of scary. It seems there's all this debate and People seem toxic to each other, or they're triggered, or it just seems like a real dangerous place. And it wasn't like that when I was younger. I'm not so sure that universities need to remain the way that they are.
Well, the good news is education is shifting. There's so much information out there that structured learning is just one system. Now you have every expert, every person that goes and doesn't participate in that system who is a legitimate expert, instead of, locking themselves up behind, this university paywall system. You can distribute it out there for the people. And so people, I guess the point is, instead of having a structure, people now, instead of just be given what's on their plate, they've got the whole menu.
Yeah, no, I think it's good.
What is the most courageous thing you have ever done in your life or seen?
I think the most courageous thing I've ever done, was deciding to adopt my two sons. My older boys, Jacob and Caleb, who are now 11, they're not mine biologically, nor are they my wife's. We adopted them when they were 7 days old. And I'll tell you the backstory. Their biological mother is a cousin of my wife's, and she's been in and out of trouble her whole life, constantly going to jail. She has a drug problem, a chemical dependency problem. And when me and my wife, we were just dating at the time, her cousin became pregnant, reached out to my wife and wanted to know if we wanted to have them. And we were like, what are you talking about? So my wife, of course, wasn't my wife at the time. She told me, and I was like, what are you, crazy? No, it's ridiculous. So that was like 4 or 5 months previous to them being born. So fast forward, they are born, and the mother drops them off at our apartment when they were 7 days old. Now, mind you, I know nothing about babies. I've grown up where people constantly try to get me to hold their baby. I'm always like, no, I don't want to hold your baby. It's nothing again. I'm just afraid if I drop it, and then I'm going to be forever known as the person that dropped your child. I didn't know anything about them. And so here they are in my little apartment with me and my girlfriend, and there's 2 babies there. Well, since they're not our children, there's no chance of my girlfriend being able to breastfeed them or anything. So we had to make bottles. And when I say make bottles, you had to make a lot, like 16 at a time. And because they were twins, it wasn't like, if there was one baby, it probably wouldn't have affected me the same way, because my girlfriend would just take care of it. She would just hold it, change it, bathe it, feed it. It wouldn't be that big a deal. But because there was 2, she's like, look, you're going to have to help me. I can't do this on my own. So here I am. We each have a baby on our hip. Doesn't matter if we change them, trade them back and forth. I still always got a baby with me. So in the middle of the night, I have to wake up a couple times to feed the baby, to change the baby. And I don't know if you want to compare it to like a puppy, but it was only after a couple days that turned into weeks that they were still there that I'd become really attached to them. And within a matter of just like a month, my girlfriend would leave the house to go to the grocery store or something, and she would leave me at the house with both kids. So now I knew nothing about babies. Now I'm taking care of 2 babies. And at some point, the biological mother wanted them back or something like that. I don't remember. And I was like, no, I didn't feel comfortable about it, because I knew that she was probably on drugs again or something like that. I was like, see if you could talk her out of it. Well, just tell them they're okay. We'll take care of them. And then at some point she got arrested again and was back in prison. So now, the biological mother being in prison and us having the babies, we had to get like a power of attorney, things like this, because if they got sick or something, we couldn't even take them to the hospital or get a prescription for medication or anything, because they weren't ours. So we started going through that. And it was around that time we hired a lawyer to get all that stuff done. And I had already been with my girlfriend at the time for 3 years. And so I had planned on popping the question at some point to get married, but I was kind of propelled now because of this change in our life.
I was going to say, this isn't how you anticipated it happening?
No, not at all. No. And so we went down to the justice of the peace. We got married, and then we started the adoption process. And a couple months later, a couple $1,000s later, we were the parents. And then, of course, later we had a big wedding down in Mexico and invited everybody and all that stuff. But I guess that was probably the most courageous thing I've ever done, was stepping up to the plate. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't plan for it. I didn't even see it coming. It just kind of was there. It wasn't even like I accidentally got my girlfriend pregnant and had a couple months to think about it. It was like literally they were just there. And now looking back 11 years later, it was the best thing I ever did.
That's awesome. Yeah, you got my heart racing there. Just the idea of like no knowledge. It's like somebody knocking on your door and just being like, "Hey, you have a child. Here he is."
Yeah, and like I said, like within a short amount of time, just all these instincts started kicking in. All of a sudden,
that's amazing.
I felt more protective and things, and because it was twins, thank God we went through the twins the first time. Because later, when me and my wife had our son Luke with the one baby, it was a piece of cake taking care of one. I didn't have to do anything really.
Vacation time. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I remember when I was younger, and I'd always hear these young couples who had just had a baby complaining about how it won't sleep and things like that. I used to be like, oh, you got it so easy. I don't want to hear it. You guys can take turns. But
what rule?
It goes by quick.
What rule do you have for yourself that you never break?
I would say loyalty, being loyalty even to a fault. I think if I become your friend or your partner in crime or something like that, I'm pretty loyal. Like even if it means I'm going to go down and catch a little flack for being your friend or something like that, I usually will stand guard. And I think loyalty probably. That's probably a rule I choose not to break.
So it's amazing how much that word comes up on this podcast as being important to people all over. Loyalty.
Really?
Yeah, it's a very powerful concept.
Yeah, I can imagine, man.
What does it mean to be a man in today's world?
Ooh, now that's a tough one. I would say sacrifice, responsibility. At least that's what you're supposed to be as a man. You're supposed to be someone who can be trusted. You're supposed to be someone who puts the family or someone in front of yourself, has the courage to see things through. Because there's going to be tough times out there as a man. You know, there's definitely downsides. Like if you're on a ship and it's sinking, the lifeboats go to the women and the children. That's just part of being a man. You got to suck it up. You're expected to suck it up. It's just part of what's going to happen. If there's self-defense or something of your home or space or neighborhood, as a man, you're required, at least dependent upon, to act, to defend the neighborhood or your loved ones or even your home country, your homeland, things like that. I don't know. Just that's a tough one to answer. What does it mean to be a man today? Because I don't know what it was like to be a man in another era, I suppose. So that's a difficult question to answer. I would say, yeah, I would stick with my original answer. Probably just sacrifice.
You want to bounce back to the most embarrassing
The most
experience
embarrassing, man. The reason it's so hard for me is because I've had lots of embarrassing moments. I mean, a lot.
Well, pick one from the pool.
I'm trying to think. I think I had to do a public speaking at one point when I was in school.
Well, that's
of course,
interesting.
now public speaking doesn't affect me at all because of practice on the microphone and in front of other people. But I remember I was trying to do, I think it was like a book report or something, and I was in front of a whole big group of students there, and there was a couple girls in the class, and I think I really had a crush on one. I really liked her, and I'd been making some headway with her, at least I thought. And then when I had to do that presentation, I was shaking, I was sweating, my palms were sweating. I was like beginning to stutter, and I was just messing it up. And it was painfully obvious to everybody in the room that I was freaking scared to death. And kids were laughing at me, and I just felt horrible. And the girl that I had the crush on was even laughing at me. And I didn't have really the guts to talk to her after that day. It was probably, that was just one of many, but that was a day I remember, even to this day. And that was probably 30 years ago.
Well, that's fantastic, though, especially considering that it's, the one thing you do that you love, your podcast and broadcasting. You've already had like the most embarrassing experience associated with that. So it's like, what else can top that? There's nothing.
Yeah. No, now it doesn't bother me a bit. Like, I could publicly speak anywhere. It doesn't, I mean, because I guess I came to realize, like, if somebody's laughing at me, I mean, well, of course they're laughing. Look at the way you're acting. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people, when it comes to public speaking, they're so afraid of making a mistake that lots of times if you stutter or make a mistake when you're talking, just move on by it, or just, excuse me, start over. And nobody really, it's not as big a deal to them as it is to you.
Yeah, until you broadcast it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, Kyle, that was the last of our regular questions. We've got some bonus questions coming up. I just wanted to thank you, Kyle, for coming on 13 questions and answering these these things and giving wisdom to our listeners.
Yeah, man, it was fun. I enjoyed it. Yeah, pretty cool. Nobody really sits down and asks me any serious questions. I'm always talking about, mythical flying beasts or something like that, some strange cryptid in the sewers. Never get to just hear any serious, hard questions.
Nice. Well, good for you, because we've got bonus questions coming up after the break. All right, welcome back to the bonus round. You ready, Kyle?
Yep. Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, question number 1. What do you most admire in a man?
Ooh, I would probably say like earlier, same kind of thing, sacrifice and courage. I like that. People that stand up and do something when they probably shouldn't, but they do it anyways. I think that's probably what I admire the most in a man is, courage isn't the lack of fear, but it's acting in spite of it. So when you see a hero, my brother's a firefighter. You think about being lucky, you might save someone's life.
I don't wanna hold night. I don't wanna hold night. No what? I don't wanna hold night. I don't wanna hold night. No what? I don't wanna hold night. I don't wanna hold night. No what? I don't wanna hold night. I don't wanna hold night. No what? I don't wanna hold night. I don't wanna hold night. No what? I don't wanna hold night. I don't wanna hold night. No what?
Why is one man rich and another man poor? Why we ain't satisfied? Why we gotta have more? Why your suicide rates on the rest so high? Why I tell you the truth but you say don't lie? Why is being a good father at an all-time low? Why is it acceptable? Yo, why I don't know. Why she blame him and he blame her? It's useless. Ask yourself this question. Why you making excuses? Why do parents gotta bury their kids? Why we text and drive, not caring how scary it is? Why it's so hard to forgive and leave the past behind? And if you did, then that's divine. Why don't you help your brother when you see him fall? Why do we act like God don't see it all? Why do we call them black, them white, them Asians and use labels? Now that's racism.
I don't wanna hold night.
Why?
I don't wanna hold night. No why? I don't wanna hold night.
Why?
I don't wanna hold night. No why? I don't wanna hold night.
Why?
I don't wanna hold night. No why? I don't wanna hold night.
Why?
I don't wanna hold night. No
Why is
why?
there innocent people locked up for life, while some people can't say nothing nice? Why do we always gotta question what all of it means? And why won't you follow your dreams? Tell me why. The night when you took my dad, why'd you let me see my grandpa cry? And tell me why. And why do you choose to hide, even though you was born to fly? And tell me why. And why don't we turn from all the hate? And why don't we learn from all the
wanna Hawaii? How you wanna Hawaii? Yo, what? How you wanna Hawaii? How you wanna Hawaii? Yo, what?
This should be considered entertainment and not therapy. We hope you benefit from our resources available at 13questionspodcast.com. Thank you for listening.